Ladies and gentlemen, it is time to venture into the unknown because in week 7 of Poker and Pizza, I am delving into the pizza world that I've never experienced before as we try something new here on the stream. What's going on, everybody? We have Jets Pizza today. This is official University of Illinois campus-style pizza. Never had it. No idea what to expect. We're going to be trying something called bold pepperoni. So excited about that. We'll unveil that in a second. Also, it's the unknown because we're going to take your questions today. I don't have a very specific topic to talk about today. I've gotten some questions from social media, people that have posted on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. And if you have questions here in the audience, we've got the chat windows up here, YouTube and Twitch. Drop any questions you have in the chat. You can ask questions about specific hands you played, general strategy or theory questions. You can ask questions about poker bankroll, poker career, all of that stuff. Any questions you have, drop them in. Would love to cover them. I'll definitely take a look at that. Thanks for letting me know, Jess. I saw your post there right before. All right. Let's see what we're getting into here. This looks like we're going Detroit style here, the kind of thick, crunchy crust, and it looks like we have big pepperoni and little pepperonis. Apparently the bold pepperonis are these little kind of like round kid circle pepperonis. I don't know if they're spicy. We're going to find out. Here we go. First bite. Never had this before. And we'll compare this to last week. Garcia's has a really good Detroit style pizza. So here we go. Okay. So there are 3 different types of pepperoni. They have the big pepperonis, the little ones, and then they got like the crunchy little like square like sprinkled pepperoni. The sauce is not fantastic. The crust is good. I can see why this would be popular. Campus town, you know, people out drinking late, little hungover, need a little late night pizza to kind of like bring the alcohol content down. It's like a 6 out of 10. Probably would not go out of my way to get this again, but I see it. Thank you, Jess. It's amazing. You stop going to Sport Clips and actually go to the same place your wife gets her hair done, you get decent haircuts. Who would have thought? All right. We're going to get this piece wrapped up. Then we're going to dig in on the day. How was everybody's weekend? I played one poker tournament this weekend. I played the online ring event, the Run Good online ring event. Did really good. We got up to 40K from 10K starting, and then just lost a flip, like 20 or 30 from the money. The crust is really good. Their sauce just isn't as good as Garcia's. All right. No, you don't. Sports Clips. All right, look. I'll tell you right now. I don't really give a shit about like name brand anything, right? The crunch is nice. It got better as it went on. It did grow on me. Maybe it's like 7 out of 10. The problem is I just really love Garcia's, so it probably never was going to compare to Garcia's, but it's not bad. So I'm not a big like I need the name brand version of anything. Like I have no problem going to Old Navy and like actually I need to do it now. I usually go to Old Navy like at the end of February and I'll go at the end of like October because all their summer stuff will be dirt cheap. All of their winter, like you go opposite seasons, I'll get a ton of cheap winter stuff now and I'll get a ton of cheap summer stuff in the fall. I don't need to go to like really fancy, like Gap and Ralph Lauren, any of that. I don't care. Whatever. So I didn't mind like back in the day. Getting haircuts at Sports Clip was kind of nice. It was like you go in, you get like the sports were on TV, so you could watch sports while you were cutting your hair. People wouldn't bother you and ask you stupid questions. You could work on my phone, you get the hair wash. It was a nice package, but it got worse and worse. The one here, like I every time I went in, there were like 4 new people working that I'd never recognized before. Like you'd think going in every like 6 weeks to get your hair cut, you'd recognize, but literally like I went like 6 or 7 times in a row, never saw the same person there twice. They couldn't keep anybody over there. And then I had this one situation where like this lady like gave me razor burn. And then tried to blame it on me. She's like, I felt her put the razor up and it was like hot and she got like a little too close. And then she's like, oh, you look like you have this rash on the right side of your head. I'm like, yeah, you just friggin' razor burned me. She's like, I don't know. I'm like, I felt it. So that was kind of it for me. I was done. My wife took a look at it. She's a nurse. She's like, yeah, you got razor burn. I'm like, yeah, we're done. Chad says this weekend sucked balls. I only played last night, but put a dent in my $100 an hour. I was hitting at my regular Sunday game. Can't win them all, but felt like I could. I mean, it happens. It happens. We need those bring us down to earth sessions to keep us motivated, right? All right. Again, you have any questions, drop them in either chat, YouTube or Twitch. If you're watching over on Twitter, head over to youtube.com/@RobGardnerLive and join the live stream so you can get in on the mix. I'm going to dig into some of the questions I already have here. We're going to start with this question from Gidrash on Twitter. He says, interesting spot in the $11 10K last night. There were 10 left. I just doubled to 19 big blinds, but I was 5 out of 10. Okay. So this is probably like 2,300 to top. Second biggest stack. Are we back? I think we're back. OBS disconnected for a minute. I got scared there. Okay. All right. Let me read this again real quick. Sorry we blipped there. Internet. So he's in the ACR $11 10K, 10 left. Had just doubled to 19 bigs. The second place stack min raised off of 30 and he had 10s on the button. He ended up shoving, but he wondered if it was ICM suicide because ACR now has the final table rollback so that the average stack on the final table is 25 bigs. Says, I can see both sides. Winning there makes the final table stack even bigger, but maybe I'd have a flat here. I can't really advocate for just folding. I did lose, but that's not really the point. What do you do here? So this is kind of a fascinating question because the final table rollback is a pretty new, it's pretty new to us. I know that some people do the whole like VPN to GG thing. I don't know why. I don't understand the point of it, but they do it. And like GG's had final table rollback for a while. But for those of us that play the US facing sites, it's a new format. And if you don't know what that format is, essentially that means that whatever the stacks are, once the final table is reached, they adjust what the big blind is so that the average stack at the final table is a little bit deeper. And this just gives you more play at the final table and makes it a little bit less of a kind of jammy crapshoot. Yeah, so the details are he has 19 big blinds. I can put it in the Twitch chat because nobody's over there. Villain raises off 30 big blinds. Hero has 19 big blinds on the button with 10-10. 5 out of 10. Villain has us covered. And we're going to get a stack depth boost at the final table. Now, this is how I like to do this. Let's zoom out of the whole reroll, right? And look at this in a normal tournament format first, because this is the situation that you're going to face more often. And if we can kind of figure out the baseline, spoiler alert for those of you guys that have gotten into the Ramp Poker beta course over there. Once we've figured out our baseline, we can figure out how we're going to deviate for a more unique situation. So in a situation where we were 5 out of 10 with a hand like pocket tens, would we be committing ICM suicide here? And generally speaking, the answer is going to be no, with a few exceptions. The pay jumps are very, very flat from 10th to 9th, 9th to 8th, 8th to 7th. So going out 10th, right? When you have the opportunity to double up and realistically be at worst second place in chips, he doesn't tell us what the chip leader stack is, but there's a decent chance we might even be chip leader, is going to be very ICM profitable for us. In addition to that, if we kind of lean with the baseline, since this is an ACR tournament, a little bit better player pool, that these bigger stacks kind of know they're supposed to put pressure on the table. We can expect them to be opening with a wider range and calling much tighter because they don't want to give up their big stack, which is going to make shoving also profitable. So in those types of situations, jamming from an ICM perspective is going to be great, and tens are definitely going to make the cutoff. Where we would start to get away from that and get to the point where now this would maybe be a little bit ICM punty, and we would consider flatting versus 3-betting, would be if there was like very extreme chip dynamics. Like, let's say we're 5 out of 10, but 6th through 10th all have like 4 big blinds or less. Now we're kind of at the point where like, yeah, we probably want to flat. We know we can like survive a couple of those guys busting pretty easily without us, losing a lot of chips. But that's not going to happen very often. Like we're talking pretty extreme. Like if the stacks at this table from 5th on down were like, we have 19, 6th has 17, 7th has 13, 8th has 11, 9th has 6, and 10th has 3. It's jam time. It would really need to be something extreme, like the majority of the stacks were like 5, 6 big blinds or less in order to make that a thing. So in a normal tournament situation, shoving here is going to be great. It's going to be profitable. I think this is a shove that a lot of players struggle with. They get to this spot. They have an opportunity to jam. They want to make the final table, right? We all have that feeling of like accomplishment, like somehow making the top 10 doesn't mean anything, but making the top 9 magically is this amazing thing now that, we get to go brag to our buddies about or whatever. So we have this kind of intrinsic bad subconscious strategy where it's like, oh, I got to make the final table. So a lot of players will struggle and not want to shove in this spot because they really don't want to go out 10th. And I get it. I've been there. I've struggled with it too. But the thing is, I would rather go out 10th here 40% of the time and top 3 here 60% of the time than flat here, lose the hand a majority of the time, and just have a lot of 7ths and 8ths and 9ths and 6ths and 5ths and not have very many top 3s. So I think that in general, this is going to be a fine jam. Now, there is another option here that hasn't been discussed. Can anybody figure out what it is? I'm tempted to have one more slice. Tempted. We'll see. I'm going to wait. I might just have a protein drink. Does anybody know what our other option is in this spot? Well, we already talked about folding. Folding is not an option. We're definitely at worst calling. There it is. Ben's got it. It's the non all in 3-bet. So this is where I do this a lot. If you're new here or if you're just getting to know me, I love to poke huge fucking holes in everything that people teach as the way it's supposed to be, right? Because a lot of people are going to be like, no, you can't non all in 3-bet here. The sizes are too small. You just have to jam. Bullshit. Okay. There is nothing wrong with having like a 4.3 big blind non all in 3-bet here. All right. And it is situational. It's not something we want to do a ton of. It's not something we want to do all the time. The reason that people will tell you it's bad is because when you raise to like 4.4, 4.3, 4.5 bigs and your opponent jams, right? Now we're in a spot where it's like 14.5 big blinds to win. It's going to be 38 plus the 2.5, like 40.5. So we're going to be getting like 2.6 to 1. And it's really hard to be in a spot versus a range where 2.6 to the 1 is not going to be good odds. So people hate it from an equity realization standpoint because they don't like the fact that you're getting those good of odds to call and you're folding. They also don't like the fact that you're putting 25% of your stack in and folding. But it's not painting the entire picture. And there's two things that the chat pros that love to kind of live by the biblical way of playing poker completely miss in the freaking exploit world. And there's two very important things that are missed here. Number one is if by raising to 4.5 big blinds against an opponent, you split their range to the point where they're never jamming 9s, they're never jamming 8s, they're never jamming 7s, they're never jamming 6s, they're never jamming ace queen, right? We can put ourselves in a situation where when they come over the top, they got it. So that's one thing that's being neglected. Now, if it's not that type of opponent, if you're up against a really, really good opponent who knows you and you know them and like that you just know that they're going to call off appropriately or jam appropriately, then yeah, this is not going to work and is not a good play. But if you're up against a type of opponent who either doesn't respect you and is going to see this as super nutted and they're going to play a very, very, very tight 4-bet range, or they're just really weak and they don't know any better, this starts to become viable. The other thing that people don't understand is you're getting so much fold equity here. If you're up against a very loose, uncondensed range that is just opening super wide to apply pressure to the table, that we're probably auto-profiting on our 3-bet alone just from the fold equity. And the times they do shove and fold, it's not going to push us into the point of this being a minus EV play. It may not be max optimal, but we're also not able to like factor in future game and factor in our tournament life and all of those things. So not all in 3-bet is an option here. And something to think about too is if we can not all 3-bet here with hands like pocket 10s, we can not all 3-bet here, not all in 3-bet here with hands like ace 5 offsuit that are like a blocker to, our opponent's strongest hands, take some of the strongest hands out of the picture. And we can use it as like a 3-bet fold bluff just to win some additional pots. Remember, if we're going to like 4.4, 4.5 bigs, we're risking 4.5 to win 4.5, right? This has to work like not even about 33% of the time, depends on where you're at, right? This doesn't have to work a ton for us to, 50%. I'm tired. It doesn't have to work a ton for this to be profitable. And the nice thing about it is, one of the biggest struggles people have deep in tournaments is accumulating chips because they get card dead. There's a lot of players that rely on getting premium hands and they get a run of premium hands and they make a deep run and then they get, to a final table and they just go card dead and they don't know what to do. You got to be able to find these spots. So I say all that to say, we're never folding. Our baseline is going to be jam. Our exploit against particular opponents is going to be not all in 3-bet. Flatting would be the third option if we were in a spot where we were in very extreme ICM, lots of really short stacks. Now, how does it deviate in a situation where the blinds roll back and we have deeper stacks at the final table? And I think the answer is going to be pretty minimal. The value of stacks being deeper is directly tied to your skill advantage. So if you were playing, I'm just going to take an extreme. If you were playing in a free roll with a bunch of players who had no idea how to play the game, they didn't know their ranges, they didn't know their sizing, they were very weak, very passive, very, very timid players, and you had a massive edge on the table, then we would be in a spot where that rollback would be very valuable, and we would want to kind of avoid flip situations. And that's a place, again, where I could start justifying this. I think in the average ACR final table, we're going to have some edge, but it's not enough edge that I'm like, oh, going from, say the average stack was 15 big blinds here. Going from an average stack of 15 big blinds to an average stack of 25 big blinds, where we're getting a 60% increase on our stack, and jumping our stack from 20 big blinds to like 32 isn't enough of an edge to pass on this spot. Because like all it's doing, right, getting deeper, all it's doing is it's allowing the skill edge to be applied a little bit more. And in some ways, while that's good, it also can lead to situations where like the passive weaker stacks now just get to hold on a little bit longer, right? And now you're forced to battle with the better stacks because they're just going to slowly blind off, and you don't want to run your stack down to 12 big blinds waiting for 3 or 4 people to bust, so you end up having to play with the better players because the other players aren't putting chips in the pot. It doesn't feel like the edge that I think we would want it to be. So all in all, I think shove is our best play. I think that you can make a case, especially opponent specific, for not all in 3-bet, and we'd only be flatting in the most extreme situations. Chad says, yeah, just click it back to like 4.5 or 5. I like the 3-bet there if that's the case. Are they a fish? Frank asks. Yeah, I mean, the player types definitely do matter. And what's hard here is the players that the not all in 3-bet would work best against are the ones who also have stronger ranges, right? Like, we're in a spot where, you know, these players who don't understand ICM, don't understand final table dynamics, are not opening enough. So those are the players where when you go for the not all in 3-bet and they 4-bet rip, they've got it, which is kind of nice, but they're going to have it a little bit more often because their range is more condensed. Now, what's interesting is like some of these better players, like they're just going to assume you don't have any 3-bet bluffs there, and they're going to overfold too. So it's not a situation where, especially if you're deviating, right? They've been playing with you for 3 hours. They haven't seen that sizing once. And then we do what I like to call throwing in noise, which I think is a vastly underrated concept at final tables, but even in like late game of tournaments, you just do something that looks like it's supposed to be something different, and that extra noise will really get in opponent's head. You know, say you've been min opening every single hand for 3 hours, and then you just out of nowhere 3x. Your opponents are going to assume that 3x is information. Like that is a deviation. You don't have to, like, literally, you can just mix something like that in with a normal hand in your normal range just to get in people's heads. And it's kind of fascinating because in those spots, it's kind of like mentally polarizing, because your opponents are going to assume that it's something on one of the extremes, and they're forced to make a decision, right? Is this stronger? Is it weaker? And reality, it's not anything. And I love doing stuff like that. So you get that with this, where like if you haven't done one of these really micro 3-bets for the entire tournament and you throw this in at a final table, now your opponent's kind of forced to go, is this bullshit or is this just the nuts every single time? And that's a gross place to be. That's why polarization is so difficult to play against. So it's definitely a strategy that I like to employ. And mix in, you know, as much as I can. I've seen a lot of players in micro and low stakes 3-bet to 3 big blinds if someone opens the 2 and they have monsters like King King. Look, there are definitely when it comes to like clickbacks, which is what Scott's talking about, is a clickback 3-bet. I'm a huge advocate for taking notes on those players and paying attention to the hands they do it in, because there's really two schools of players. There are definitely a portion of the player pool who will click back with only the strongest hands, aces and kings, and that's their only clickbacks. But there's also a portion of the player pool who are the bullshit clickbackers who they will click back with Jack 7 suited. And their whole point of doing it is to basically go on offense or take the lead and have the ability to see bet on flop. So you want to pay attention to who's who and take notes on who's who, because against the players who are doing it really loose and sometimes even loose and capped, there are players out there who will click back only with capped ranges, and like when they're 3-betting with their aces and kings and queens, they're actually going to a proper sizing. Those players, if you figure that out, you get to absolutely punish them in all kinds of ways. You get to 4-bet really loose. You can flat and then have a leading range that they're never expecting. You can flat and have a very robust check raising range if you would prefer to apply pressure that way, knowing that they're very, uncondensed but capped. There's just infinite ways to beat those players up. But you got to take notes. You got to be diligent. You can't just like, oh, I'm not in the hand and they click back, whatever, I'm going to go pay attention to everything else. When you see those clickbacks, you need to watch that showdown and get a feel for where people are at. If you have any strategy questions, drop them in one of the two chats. I'll answer them here in real time. Otherwise, I've got a few other questions I will answer that have come in from social media. Like, I hate to think I do it, but I like to geotype, click back against Eastern Euros and Brazilians. I've never gotten into it. Some people live and die by the whole like geolocation player style type, and some people have had some success with it, but to me, again, it's kind of just noise. Of all the things I can be paying attention to at the table, it just seems like that's kind of very low on the totem pole compared to other things. And I feel like I'm going to get a lot from just watching their play anyway, to where like the country thing is just like whatever for me. Cool, Thomas. Glad. Hopefully that helped. All right. We got another question here from Bonesaw Poker. This is a cash game question. I know we got some cash game players in here, so it'll be interesting to see what you guys think compared to what I think. He says, in low stakes cash, every time the villain gets aggressive, it's the nuts, except I really have a hard time folding top 2 pair or better. Should I just be folding this 100% of the time? So we're getting into the world of bluff catching. And I think it's really important to separate bluff catching in tournaments from bluff catching in cash games. There's a lot more variables in tournaments, right? The stage of the tournament impacts how much someone might be bluffing. The money at stake impacts how much someone might be bluffing. Stack depths impact things. There's just a lot more dynamics in those spots. And you're going to end up in certain situations where you may have the opportunity to bluff catch, and it may be the only opportunity you're going to get in the tournament. Cash games are different because we're not under this internal clock that's clicking, right? Like, yeah, we're only going to play a limited session, and yeah, like people change tables and move, and, sometimes people are on tilt or whatever. But in general, the blinds aren't going up. We usually have multiple buy-ins in our pocket, so, calling and busting is not really busting. We can fire another bullet or whatever. So we're kind of in this space where we're basically shopping, right? And we don't have to buy anything. And one of the things that I'm a huge advocate for, especially at lower stakes, is understanding that you can wait for the best deal you want. So baseline, what I teach people when it comes to bluff cashing and cash games is never take the first spot, ever. Never, ever take the first spot. And the reason for this is twofold. Usually the first spot we have an opportunity to catch a bluff is like a medium-ish size pot. And the odds that you're going to bluff catch somebody correctly twice in the same session are so small at these stakes. Because when you catch somebody bluffing at low stakes or mid stakes, unless they're just an absolute maniac, like people hate being picked off. It makes them squirmish. It makes them, it's embarrassing, whatever. So like you usually when you catch somebody bluffing and you make a big bluff catch, they're just going to stop. They're going to shut down. They're going to play more conservative. They're going to play more face up. They don't want to keep hemorrhaging chips. And there's this kind of mental struggle that starts taking place too. And if you guys have ever been caught bluffing, you can relate to this where, the first time you get caught bluffing, now you feel like every time you have a weak hand, it's super obvious. And it shuts down your ability. You just kind of have this feeling like you have your bets have no respect, right? So the worst thing you can do is be playing 1-2 and there's like a $35 pot and you think your opponent bluffs on the river and you decide to make some hero call with third pair and you win a $35 pot and now this guy that's bluffing never bluffs the rest of the cash session. So I'm a huge advocate for not picking off the first bluff. Like if I get bluffed out of a smaller medium-sized pot, I know that player is going to get more confident. They're going to get an impression of me that I overfold, and they're going to come back for seconds. And so I'll lose the $35 pot so I can win the $450 pot, right? Where they get overconfident and they bluff in a spot. Because it's also cash games and we don't have the same like time and big blind restrictions that we have in tournaments, that means we can wait for a spot where we're really comfortable. Like, I think some people think, and this is on both sides, there is this, it's the TV poker's fault, but there's a lot of misconceptions and preconceived notions when it comes to bluffing and bluff catching. With bluffers, everybody thinks that bluffing has to be with like the shittiest hand on the planet on the craziest board for the biggest pot. And you have to go massive. It's like, oh, there needs to be like $400 in the pot, and I shove like an $800 2x pot jam with deuce 7 offsuit on a 4 flush board. Like, yeah, that's a bluff by definition. But some of the easiest bluffs, some of the most profitable bluffs, are bluffing in small pots where our opponents made it very obvious that they just have nothing and getting their crappy ace highs to fold. Like, there's a whole nother world in the bluffing world where you're just picking up small pot after small pot and completely flying under the radar that doesn't involve like putting your entire stack at risk just because that's what we see on TV and it's cool. And bluff catching is the same way, right? Everybody thinks, oh well, bluff catching means I just need to have this sick friggin' read where I have king high and I'm just putting him on a missed open-ended straight draw and I'm going to call this 2x pot jam with king high and everybody's going to applaud me and they're all going to stand up and they're going to carry me out yelling Rudy, Rudy, like as they walk me out to the parking lot and I collect all my... No, like I get it. That's some of your guys' dreams. You go to bed at night, you dream about those moments, right? And it feels good to pull it off. But if you care about money, it's pretty stupid. If we're really thinking about it, it's pretty friggin' stupid to put your opponent on an exact hand and try to make a call with that much, risk in play. Like, you can absolutely, let me ban this quick. Bye-bye. You can absolutely bluff catch with strong hands, right? You can wait for a situation where you get 2 pair trips or full houses. Like, you don't have to bluff catch with the weak hands. Now, bringing all that back to this question, because Bonesaw is asking, he's like, well, I have a hard time folding 2 pair or better. Should I be folding 100% of the time? And this is where it gets a little bit more nuanced. I was playing in a PLO tournament at the MGM 2 summers ago. And we got in a situation where there was this player who was really good. It was very obvious that they were like a good PLO player. And like I could tell just the way he talked about the game, the hands he's playing, like this is a guy that plays this game regularly. And we got in a situation where we were in a multi-way plot. We flopped the ace high flush. Notice I didn't say the nut flush. We flopped the ace high flush. And in PLO, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but generally speaking, like when there's lots of redraws and you're in multi-way pots, I play very pot control-y because there's just a lot of ways that, a nut high flush can go sideways by the river and you don't want to bloat a pot. So I smooth called a quarter pot bet on the flop. We were heads up on the turn. I faced a half pot bet on the turn. And I smooth pot called that. The river bricked out. This was I had hearts. I think it was like a 9 of hearts, 8 of hearts, 6 of hearts were on the board. And my opponent bet like 2/3 pot on the river. And we were still really deep. And in this situation, I could have just called. But obviously, like, they can still have weaker flush draws or whatever. I got the second nuts. So I clicked it back. I just literally min clicked it. And my opponent looked really confused and then jammed. And I snap folded. Literally snap folded. Didn't even hesitate. And he was like, "What did you have?" And I was like, "I had the ace high flush." And he didn't believe me. Literally didn't believe me. And it was like, "I have the ace high flush." And he's like, "How do you fold the ace high flush there?" I'm like, "Because literally there's no other hand you can have there. Like, there's no way on the planet you're 4-bet jamming me with like a king high flush, a queen high flush. You don't have the ace of hearts for the blocker. So like, there's just no way. You're not doing it. The only way that anybody could bluff there is if like he knew he was amazing and I knew I was amazing and he knew he could get me to fold that hand, which obviously from his reaction didn't. And sure enough, he had flopped a straight flush. So I say all that to say, if we are in a situation where, I can't go through all the possible scenarios, but if we're in a situation where we are thinking through the hand and the types of hands that this opponent will play, and we're thinking through the history we have with our opponent, and we get to the river and we literally cannot think of a hand we can beat. Like we're just looking at like, he doesn't have this, he doesn't have that, doesn't have this. And you just get it whittled down to the point where you're like, the only hands they have here beat me, then it's the easiest fold in the world. Now, it'd be great if we've always had those situations, but that's not going to be the case. Sometimes we're going to be in spots where we don't know, right? And this is where you have to kind of like, you have two options. One, you can just go by feel and kind of really think through like, okay, do I think he's ever bluffing here? Right? That's the first thing. And if you don't think they're ever bluffing, then now we're kind of to the point where it's like, well, let's say they're making a pot size bet, right? This is where it'd be 33%, right? So if we call, we're risking, pot to win 2 pots, the pot that's in the middle and the pot that they're betting. So we got to be right 1 in 3 times. Are we right 1 in 3 times? By our best guess. Do I think that I beat, 33% of my opponent's value range? And if you think it's even close, then you can just fold, right? Because like, and this is the things that they, the pros won't teach you. It's like, well, no, like, let's say you're beating 40% of his range, you got a call there, right? Well, sports bettors will tell you, okay, you don't take a minus 3,000 bet. In sports betting, you don't take minus 3,000 bets because it's really stupid to risk $300, $400, $500 for $6 profit, right? It's not a way that sports bettors recommend going. So yeah, if you have infinite bankroll and infinite time and losing $300 means nothing to you and you think you're beating 40% of his range, take your tiny little equity advantage. But again, this is a cash game, right? And there's margins of error. So if you don't think you're beating that 33% by a significant range, wait for a better spot, right? The other thing you can do is the combinatorics. If you're more of a math person, you can figure out, based on kind of like what you think their range is, how many combos of hands they have that beat you, how many combos of hands you think you beat, do the math, figure out if you have a pot odds call, and if there's a significant overage over it, then go for it. For me, I think that it's going to really depend more on your bankroll than anything. I think most players that play cash are not rolled to play cash. And what I mean by that is like, there's a lot of us, myself included, who will sit down on a 1-2 or 1-3 cash game with like our bankroll being 6K, 8K, 10K. And that's not properly rolled, right? And it's fine because we're not going to play through that entire 6, 8, or 10K at the table. So it's not like we're just going to go on a 33 buy and downswing and have complete risk of ruin and get busted. But it's also not a proper bankroll. And the further we get away from a proper bankroll, the more we need to edge pass. And these are spots where, like, if it's close and you don't really have that 30K bankroll that you should have to play these stakes, yeah, edge passing is a thing. And we want to err on the side of caution and waiting for a better spot. And this is where I think, because there's so much teaching and language around, how bad it is to do X and how bad it is to do Y, we make theoretically suboptimal or minus EV decisions that we feel guilty about, but they're still plus EV from a bankroll perspective, right? Not in terms of like absolute profit, but in terms of like what's wise for our bankroll. So I think that it's really, really important to think about all of the factors and make a decision. That being said, there are people out there, they play cash and they just kind of like, I'm never folding 2 pair in the spot. If I'm beat, I'm beat. And that's how they run. And they go on big swings. And, whether they're profitable in those spots or not comes down to the minutia of, how accurate they are in their reads about how far ahead they are on their opponent's ranges. If villain only has value bets, we're just overfolding, unfortunately. Yeah, and that's the thing. Most players don't have proper bluffs. Whenever I get picked off bluffing, I just try to pick a better spot for the next time. Yeah, I mean, it's tricky because what is a better spot? Like what do you define as a better spot? Because and this is what the solvers and GTO Wizard and all this stuff, none of that shit can teach you table image, can teach you player tendencies, can teach you the ego your opponents have. I learned that even last year at the WSOP, I learned this the hard way because I found an amazing bluff spot early in a tournament. It was a spot I knew, like I had seen this spot before in the solvers, and I took it and I got snapped off from this 52-year-old New Jersey guy with like 4th pair. And what was fascinating to me about this is after playing with this guy for a while, it became very obvious that this guy was a massive egomaniac. But the fact that he snapped me off and the way he talked about the handoff afterwards, it was very clear to me he had no thought process. Like, this wasn't like he reasoned through the situation and was thinking about my range, and we got to the river and he decided that I had a certain amount of bluffs and he elected to make an educated decision call. He snap called me on the river because he came all the way from New Jersey to Las Vegas and he wasn't going to be bullied around. And that was it. That was literally it. He called me because he didn't want to be pushed around. So I think that when we talk about bluffing and bluff catching, you can study the solvers till you're blue in the face, and you can learn all of the proper minimum defense frequencies and the best combinatorics and, which bluff catcher unblocks my opponent's, missed draws and which bluffs, unblock my opponent's folding range and all of that. You can dig in that till you're blue in the face. But sometimes you're just gonna be sitting across the table from a guy that's like, F you, I'm not folding. And in those situations, none of that information matters. And that's what's fascinating to me is like that's why, you know, we had a clip that went viral on the Chase the Dream podcast where Diana said that this game will never be solved. And it was fascinating because most of the comments were really positive. Like a lot of the recreational and casual players were like, yeah, let's go. And then you had the occasional like GTO obsessed lovers who were like, this is blasphemy. How could you speak such an abomination? It's like, no, like, obviously we understand that solvers can solve a perfect game in a perfect world. And yes, there is node locking to an extent, but come on, like we sit in these games where sometimes people just do irrational things and unpredictable irrational things. And you can't account for that. You can't, you just can't. So I think it's very, very, I think we have to be careful. And this is where the experience and practice definitely help us. Do not give anyone any more EV than they've already earned. They don't deserve another penny. Very, very, very true. Well, one pair of hands at best they would have. I mean, that's the thing. Like if you have two pair, you need to be able to put a lot of top pair in their range to even consider calling. Most of the general population does not have these big bluffs in their game like ever. No, and again, the way I teach it is if they do, they're going to keep bluffing, right? Like again, remember, if you're up against a good player who bluffs at a proper frequency, bluff catching is an basically a neutral EV proposition at best. Break even is your best goal because they're balanced between bluffs and value. So if you call optimally, you're both breaking even. They're bluffing optimally, you're calling optimally. So if they're a good player, it's going to be very difficult to bluff catch and try and make any type of profit. If they're a bad player, then they're either under bluffing, in which case we shouldn't be bluff catching at all, or they're over bluffing. And if they're over bluffing, we're going to get them. We don't have to take the first spot. They're going to keep doing it, keep doing it. They're going to get more and more confident we can wait for the best spot. MDF is player dependent in our dynamics of the table and game you are at. Although part of GTO, it's not always correct theory. Oh, absolutely. Take it to an extreme, right? Let's imagine that our opponent opens and we 3-bet them and they 4-bet shove. What's our calling range? Now we can plug that into Range Trainer or Floptimal or, you know, there's 100 different apps now that do that, right? And it's gonna, you know, say we're 40 big blinds effective. Let's say this is like button versus big blind. Just make it extreme, right? We're gonna find the button shoving all kinds of 4-bet hands. We're gonna see them shoving all of their pocket pairs. We're gonna see them shoving a lot of their suited aces, some of their like suited king queen, maybe king jack. Like they're gonna have a robust 4-bet jamming range based on the fact that we're supposed to have a wide 3-betting range off of this stacked up, so on and so forth. And then you're gonna see that your calling range in the big blind. Then if they're shoving any pair and suited, well, we're gonna call with like 8s plus. We're gonna call with our best aces, so on and so forth. But what if their only shove there is literally aces? If you knew that an opponent's 4-bet shove range there was aces, the only hand we'd be able to call with there is aces. Plain and simple. So, and this is what fascinates me is because there are, that sounds extreme, right? That's a very, very extreme example. And that's a very kind of intense thing. But there are players that do certain actions with only the nuts. There are players who only bet pot when they have the nuts. There are players who only go all in when they have the nuts. There are players who only raise when they have the nuts. And when you figure that out, you get to just throw theory right out the window. I know Frank's message is retracted. I know it said there for a second that fish bluff more. And he's not wrong. It's very game dependent, right? Frank plays in a lot of home games. And home game cash environments, where you have lots of regulars, you're going to get a lot more bluffing because there's a lot more ego involved. There's a lot of I'm going to best my best friend type stuff. You end up with a target in your back. Your friends end up with a target on their back. And in those kind of friendlier, everybody knows each other better games, he's 100% right. You are going to see a lot more bluffing, and then you would need to adjust. The average 1-2, 1-3 game in the United States, you're not going to see it as much. Now, Texas, Florida, those are like hybrids, because some of the games down there get pretty wild and crazy. So you do need to adjust to the games you're in. But again, it's a situation where I don't want to bluff catch somebody just because they have bluffs in their range. I want to bluff catch somebody because I know they're bluffing at way too high of a frequency. That is the point where bluff catching starts to be profitable. And yes, for the best of players, you can get to a point where your ability to hand read and the reads you're getting on the table and opponent tendencies can take you to a place where you can navigate a spot and figure out that your opponent never has value in a particular situation and make a situational exploitative bluff catch. That is a thing. But there are a lot of steps and layers to that. And I think what happens is we're all aware that that exists. And we just want to jump to we just want to shortcut right to it. And because our pinky toe wiggled, we want to go, oh, I bet this guy's on a busted straight draw. I call. And then they just flip over quads and you're like, oh shit. Like, so please like understand that if you want to get to the place where you're good enough to do those things, you got to put the work in. There's a lot of nuance in that. You got to really pay attention to your opponent's out of hands. Like, this is one of the questions I love to ask people when they tell me they're in a spot. They're like, well, I decided to bluff catch. The first question I want to ask is like, okay, well, how much have you been paying attention to this opponent and hands that you weren't playing? Tell me some of the hands that they played that you weren't involved in that made you think that they were bluffing at too high of a frequency. And most often when I ask that question, the person talking to me be like, well, I can't tell you any of the other hands they played. Then you don't, then whatever you're experiencing is just bias, right? If you can't tell me that you saw this hand or that hand, or you've seen some things that are leaning towards that, you really haven't been paying attention. If you really haven't been paying attention, then whatever read you have is probably based on maybe a little bit of instinct, but mostly just like that little rush in your tummy that makes you excited. And it's not a true read, right? Like a really good poker player that's zoned in and locked in and playing at their top of their game is gonna be like, no, look, I watched this monkey open 8-6 offsuit from under the gun 3 orbits ago. 2 orbits ago, they went for a double barrel turn river bet after it went check, check, flop, and they showed down 7 high and they didn't have any draws and their line didn't make sense. And then when they played the hand with me, it was a spot where he like overbet, and I haven't seen him overbet once with a value hand this session. So I felt pretty confident based on all of those factors that this was more likely to be a bluff and he was strong arming the pot. So I called with 4th pair. Damn, that's an assessment. That's a bluff catch. That is a very intelligent poker player who's dialed into the game, making a really good read. Notice that in none of that was anything, well, if I go to GTO Wizard and I pull up this chart and I node lock for this and I run it down and I go from the turn and river, I see that our minimum defense frequency is 46%. And then I run the combinatorics and I find out that 4th pair is in the top 46% of my range that would get to the river after a flop, turn, and trip river barrel. Therefore, I have to call with at least this hand or stronger. Otherwise, my opponent's auto-profiting. So then I decided to make the call. No, nobody's doing that. Nobody's doing that, especially in these live cash games. For the love of God. I saw this stat. I've seen it a couple times now, but it came up my feed again the other day. Every single time a deck is shuffled, it is in an order that it's never been shuffled in the entire history of the universe. Think about that. Every single time a deck is shuffled, it is in an order that has never been done in the entire history of the universe. So please do not tie your entire decision to bluff catch on the river to a chart you saw in a study session 2 weeks ago that was for a specific spot that will never come up again for the rest of eternity. If we played poker for 100,000 years, it would never, ever come up again in the exact same way. It's just not how it's done. In Texas, they don't think it's a bluff. They think third pair is the nuts. Yeah, he's not wrong. I've been up against those guys. I've been up against those guys. It sounds like he's like exaggerating or embellishing. No, that those players exist in Texas. And you really do have to learn that because yeah, you'll think that somebody's bluffing and they're like, no, they just think that like third pair is good. I find that to be the hardest part of poker is staying objective and not letting my bias influence my decisions. Yeah. So this is why in the course that I'm working on and getting wrapped up this week, fingers crossed, planning on launching the site a week from today. Putting the finishing touches on this stuff this week. We're adding quizzes to all the courses, 65 or 66 videos. But in that course, everything's focused on this concept of baselines. And what the way I teach it is I want for any given situation, I want a player's thought process to be my baseline is this, and I'm only deviating for these reasons, right? So like I'll give you the, and you guys can check the videos out like right now. You can go to rantpoker.com, 10 videos completely free available. You can join the beta course and check that out. But like in the C betting on the flop, in position, right? Our baseline is that we're going to make a small bet with 100% of range. And then we talk about the few reasons to deviate from that. And when you have a baseline and then you have your reasons to deviate, that helps eliminate a lot of the bias because now instead of having 12 options and like feeling like you got to throw a dart to pick one, and then our bias now has the opportunity to go, well, we got to pick one. I'm leaning towards option 7. So let's go with that. Now you have this one primary option that you know as a default is going to be right more often than not. And it's theoretically based. And so you start with that baseline and that is your bias, right? And then we only deviate when we have one of the very strong conditions that says, okay, well, yeah, my default in position is I'm going to see bet small. But if I have a strong value hand and I'm up against an opponent who isn't very good, I'm going to use a big sizing. And it just eliminates a lot of that bias. So definitely check that out if you haven't already. Top isn't always the nuts. That's the hard part about playing in Texas. Like if you want to make, you see these players who, on social media and stuff. Granted, some of them are full of shit, but some of them aren't. Who are posting these win rates that are like not possible. You know, like back in the day, it was always like, well, if you made $20 an hour at 1-2, you were killing it. And now we see people in like 1-2 and 1-3 games in like Texas and Florida posting these $60, $80, $100 an hour win rates. And it's like, is that possible? That doesn't make mathematical sense. And the answer is yes, it is possible. But if you want to make $100 an hour playing Texas cash games, you got to be ready to go 3 streets of value with top. Like literally, you're sizing top for a jam on the river, and you're going with it just about every time. And there's a problem with that. And the problem with that is you're going to run into it sometimes. Sometimes they're going to have the 2 pair, and sometimes they're going to have the sets. But you're also going to get max value from the guy that thinks third pair is the nuts, and he's never folding it. And there's a lot of those. So the way you maximize your win rate in a Texas cash game is being all in 15 to 20 times in a Texas cash game session. Well, guess what? When you're all in 15 to 20 times in a Texas cash game session, you're going to have some sessions where you turn $300 into $3K, and you're going to have some sessions where you walk out down 6 buy-ins. And again, going back to the conversation of like proper bankroll management, most people don't have the bankroll to do I'm going to lose $1,800 playing cash for 4 hours in a Texas cash game. But then they also never win 3K. So, yeah, like that was the part that I struggled with the most is I got in these spots and it's like, well, I know My hand is a value hand that can go for 3 streets, but I can't drop 5 buy-ins here. And so we have to do a lot of edge passing in those games. Now you can still make money in those games being a nut peddler. You can, and you can make some decent money, but you're not going to hit those $100 win rates. I'm halfway through the beta. Nice. I love that line of thinking, have the base to work off of and adjust from there. 100%. It's the best way to do it. It's the way that we take a very complex game and simplify it. And listen, like, I hope, like, people ask me, like, why do you do poker content? Why do you teach? Why do you coach? Why do you put information out there? Because I think this game is better when everybody's having more fun. And I think one of the ways that we have more fun at poker and we be less miserable is we end up having less decisions where we have to spend infinite amounts of brain power stressing over what we need to do, right? We didn't get into poker to play in a hand where we want to tank for 27 minutes before we make our decision because the decision is so gut-wrenching we don't know what the hell to do. And we certainly don't want 55 different thought processes bouncing through our head while we're trying to make that decision. But when you can simplify the game down to a handful of choices and some very clear variables for how to make those choices, and then in situations where there's a tie, that's where your instinct or your intuition or information from the hand can kick in. The game's a lot more fun. It's a lot more easier to play. It's less stressful. We don't spend hours like beating ourselves up over the mistakes we made because it's all within a system that we understand and feel confident in. Whereas like people that try to learn really high level, high stakes poker and apply it, it's so friggin' complicated that like the nuance is where you get crushed. And then you're stuck wondering, like, did I make a wrong decision because of, variable 67 on the priority list that I didn't consider? It really messes things up. 45 big blinds an hour on 1-2 PLO and $35 average and hold 'em. Yeah. I mean, keep in mind, like, we talk about 1-2 and like big blinds per 100. Obviously 1-2 in Texas is not 1-2. If you've never played in Texas, please do not think that 1-2 there is 1-2 because you'll find out very quickly it's not. The standard raise sizes are larger. You're going to see lots of straddles, and straddles raise what the big blind is. You may even find some double straddles in some rooms that allow those types of things. It plays like 2-5 or 5-10, which is why those, $100 an hour win rates are absolutely there. But you have to be able to embrace the variance. I mean, in tournaments, it's the same thing is true, right? The more you embrace variance, larger field tournaments have higher ROIs. You can make more ROI in large field tournaments, but there's exponentially more variance. So in a world where we had infinite time and money, we would only ever play large fields. But since we don't have infinite time and money, we prefer small fields so we can have a consistent return. And cash games work the same way. If you can play in high variance games, your hourly is going to go up, but the swings are going to go up as well. I'm going to start doing it that way as I'm watching the beta. It's making me think yeah, like seriously, I want, like, obviously I'm financially incentivized to say, I want everybody to buy this course next week, but I really do hope that there's a world that everybody gets into that course and it gives them the foundation they never had, right? I'm not trying to replace training sites. I'm not trying to put training sites out of business. I'm trying to teach the things that the training sites aren't willing to teach and give you all better foundations so that you understand what you're doing at a high level. And then you have the foundation you need to take on some of those training sites and take your game to the next level. But a lot of the training sites skip the prerequisites. They skip the fundamentals. They don't teach you the whys and the hows of how things work. So when they start talking about these super high level concepts, it's like out of thin air. You play with I'm shit. You're not shit. Tell them about the 10, 20 games I played in Oklahoma. Yeah, I mean, it's like that, right? You haven't lived until you've sat down and realized that you're on the button and it went 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 50. And now it's 50 to call on the button and half the table hasn't looked at their cards yet. Good times. Good times. All right, y'all. that's going to do it for me. I'm going to get out of here tonight at 7:30 Eastern. If you head over to YouTube, search for Rec Poker. The Rec Poker podcast is going to be going on tonight. Good buddy of mine, Dan Kennedy, who's a massive Minnesota poker heater. It's going to be on tonight. He's had back-to-back scores up at Canterbury Club. That'll be a good time. Tomorrow night, 7:30 Eastern, new day and time for the Chase the Dream podcast. 6 of my friends, everyday human beings chasing their poker dreams. We talk about the highs and lows of the poker journey. That's going to be 7:30 Eastern tomorrow night. Watch chasethedream.com. And yeah, next week, my goal for episode 8 is I'm going to take you guys through the new website. I'm going to take you guys through some of the cool things that the course has to offer. I'll have all the details on that and future courses that are coming, because I plan on doing a lot. I'm hoping to get, 6 to 8 courses out by this summer. So thank you, everybody, for hanging out. Again, you guys have questions during the week, head over to the Rec Poker Discord, drop in the Discord, shoot me a message in DM. I love answering your questions on the stream. That's it for me, y'all. I will see you guys soon.